Everyone, Joe Waxman here, and in this video I want to look at the chart of rocker Sid Vicious, punk rocker. This one is a request, so guys, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you have not already. I'm going to share my screen. I'm actually going to start with the Wikipedia just because, sorry, wrong page. There's so much about his life. I mean, he was kind of like one of those. I mean, Sid Vicious. We have the 27 Club. I'm sure you're all aware of where all these, rockers and generally musicians die at around age 27. He beat them all. He died at 21. I mean, definitely not the youngest to die, but pretty young. All right. John Simon Ritchie. And like I said, his life reads like, it's super adventurous and jam-packed full of stuff right from the beginning. So might as well. I don't want to. There's too much important stuff that I don't want to miss out on. So I'm just going to read from the Wikipedia. So his mother was a drug addict. And I guess father was missing. They expect to be a drug who did not appear and provided no financial support, and reportedly sold marijuana to get by. So difficult upbringing. Heroin and opiates. Mother. Addicted to drugs. She was unaware that her son was attending college. Got kicked out at age 16. 1973, he met John Lydon, Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols singer. Introduced him to other guys in the band, and they were squattered. They were known as the Four Johns, quit school and began squatting. And for those who don't know, squatting means just taking up an abandoned residence and living there. That's something that punk rockers are famous for, or infamous for. They're kind of like rats. I know, I used to be in the punk rock scene. Lydon was nicknamed Sid Vicious after Syd Barrett from Pink Floyd fame. Right. So Lydon created the Sex Pistols before Sid Vicious joined, but Sid Vicious was a fan. Right. Vicious was fun, but it's not important. I'm trying to find the important stuff. So he was involved with like the early British punk rock scene with other like local punk rock, the Clash, the Slits. I don't know there. He learned to play the bass by listening for the first Ramones album, fixating on the up-tempo beat, blah blah blah. He learned by okay, so he didn't really learn very well, obviously, as we'll come to see, but he listened to the Ramones. And by the way, punk rock was imported into England, into the UK from New York. It originated in the New York underground music scene, and was closely linked to heroin. A lot of these early punk rockers were also heroin addicts, and that's how the style emerged out of that debauchery, like just the hair and the clothes and all that. Like you kind of had to be like into drugs and alcohol in the first place in order to dress like that. I mean, you didn't have to, but that's what it birthed. Vicious went to a Sex Pistols concert, and he was violent, Sid Vicious, and that's what I'm trying to get at. Chrissy Hind was involved at that time. She's American, but she was in England, I guess, before the Pretenders. High on Speed lashed Kent's head with a rusted motorcycle chain, which, according to Hind, he carried with him. And this is common of Sid Vicious, just like attacking people with chains and bottles and glass and all that. He was violent. He was a violent drug addict. I don't know why that's funny, but I guess it lends him a lot of credence and, adds to the whole mythology around Sid Vicious. Sid and Nancy, I guess you can't really separate the two. Came to attention the members of the Damned. Blah, blah. Position of lead singer, but he failed to show for the audition. Blah, blah, blah. Vicious appeared with Susie and the Banshees playing drums at the first gig. Went to the Damned performance drunk and high on amphetamines, hurled glass at the stage, attempting to strike Venom. He missed, the glass shattered a pillar, blinded a woman in one eye. Vicious was arrested. All right. McLaren, so they kicked out Glenn Matlock from the Sex Pistols because apparently he liked the Beatles and that wasn't punk rock enough. But there's probably a lot of other things going on. Generally, we know Wikipedia is fake news, but they might be real news at times. So, I mean, it's really hard to say what they're going to censor out and what they're not. And I'm just too lazy to do like real research, like reading a book about it or articles or, this is the condensed version. Since I do it so often, I'm always like making excuses. Sorry. If Johnny Rotten is the voice of punk, then Vicious is the attitude. I mean, he really is iconic. He became Sex Pistols uber fan. He was encouraged to be drunk and disorderly. Sid was offered up as a sacrificial lamb by the people around the Pistols. None of them would have gone over the top. He was their kamikaze pilot, and they were all too happy to strap him in and send him off. In 1977, the Sex Pistols were assigned to A&M Records. They trashed the company's office, and then they held a private party at the Speakeasy. Blah, blah, blah. They confronted the BBC DJ Bob Harris, who's the presenter, blah, 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 blocking Harris behind the bar, broken bottles in hand. They demanded to know when they would be on the show. A bar fight ensued. Sid Vicious jammed a broken bottle into the face of BBC recording engineer George Nicholson. Harris was rescued by Procol Harum road crew. Blah, blah, blah. They weren't arrested, but A&M dropped them. And Capitol Radio banned all Sex Pistols music from its stations. I mean, these guys were like real, like crazy. I mean, especially Sid Vicious, drug addict, petty criminal, violent, tough. Like it's not just all for looks and show. Kind of wish it was in some ways because it's like it's a little too much. But I mean, I guess it makes a good story, Played his first gig, was screened on the green, but he could not play bass. He had no bass experience, so he could not play well. So guitarist Steve Jones played bass on the band's debut album. So he didn't play bass on their only album, which is crazy, and amazing. He was not a good bass player. He was allowed to play bass on one track, but his contribution was left overdubbed by Jones. So he didn't play anything on the album. He was just like an icon, a figurehead. And in that sense, you could say punk rock's not superficial, but I guess it pretty much is because it's all about the looks and the attitude. I mean, but you know, on the other hand, punk rock has like a long track record of being extremely political and concerned with stuff that virtually nobody else is concerned with. So in that sense, it's very deep and authentic, and that is what I like about it. Dee Dee Ramone is seen shooting drugs on more than one occasion, shooting speed. Told him that the drugs were me mums, right? It sort of puts into the sort of idea that white people are always privileged or something like that, you know. I mean, he grew up as a drug addict without a father, kicked out of the home at 16. His mom was a drug addict, right? He was a drug addict, so not very privileged. 77, he met Nancy Spungen. She was a groupie, American groupie living in London. Had a history of psychological problems and also a heroin addict. Sounds wonderful. Spungen initially had her sights on Rotten, who supported herself by alternately dealing drugs and working as a topless dancer. Made herself useful by procuring drugs for musicians. Wonderful. She and Vicious became inseparable, which caused problems with the bands whose members did not like her. McLaren, the manager, admitted to planning to have her abducted and forced on the plane back to the United States. They had a strange relationship. Vicious played nursemaid when she was sick, was shy and polite with the mother. Nancy cut his meat for him. Spungen was verbally abusive, physically aggressive. He may have facilitated Sponge's occasional prostitution and watched. That's, I mean, that's hard to imagine somebody doing that. I mean, yeah, crazy. According to Rotten's wife, Nora Forster, Vicious often hit Nancy. Spungen admitted beatings, and she lied about it and came from Vicious. They shared an infatuation with knives. They went on tour together. The album was released. And once again, guys, I'm sorry if I'm reading from this, like trying to filter out what's important, but it's like his very, very short life can't be told in any other ways, you know, because I don't know it well enough. It's the only way that I can really get at what really happened in the short time span. And Nancy Spungen is a huge part of it. And their album was a huge hit and frequently listed as the most influential punk album of all time. And Vicious just a figurehead, a prop, really. I mean, I guess he played live, but he wasn't very good. And Sid Vicious also sang. He sang various songs. My favorite song that he sung was My Way, Frank Sinatra's My Way. He did a pretty cool version of that, I think. Have a listen if you haven't heard it before. Vicious. I'm trying to find something important. Okay, so the band ended. Vicious was, you know, drunk, drug addict, violent, fighting. Oh, this is interesting. He agreed. So they played in Texas. They played in the U.S. and in Texas. He agreed the audience by calling them cowboy faggots. In return, he was struck by a full can of beer to the head. That's funny. Oh, Vicious Car, Give Me a Fix. into his chest with a razor. He attacked the audience. He struck him when he felt antagonized by an audience member. He struck him in the head with the base. It's like, oh my God. These are out of control people, especially Vicious. Vicious is the most out of control. He went into a coma from drugs and alcohol. And he was told by a doctor if he did not quit drinking, he would be dead in 6 months. Wonderful. He was reunited with Spongin, and he traveled to Paris to film the Sex Pistols documentary, The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. I don't know if I've seen that, but I should watch that. My Way, the song. Sorry again. Return to New York. Blah blah blah. Nancy Spungen sung with them, and they were sometimes joined by Mick Jones. Sid sings Who Killed Nancy. All right, Death of Nancy Spungen. All right, they held a party. Vicious took approximately 32 in all tablets. This is some kind of drug that's not made anymore. Barbiturates. He was comatose the rest of the night. Well, the next morning, they found Nancy Spungen dead on the bathroom floor with a knife to her abdomen. Vicious was found wandering the hallway. First claimed to have killed her, and then he said remembered nothing. Blah blah blah. Murder weapon Nancy purchased for him. Vicious was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. He told police that he and Nancy had argued, but gave conflicting versions of what happened next, saying, I stabbed her, but I never meant to kill her, then saying he did not remember anything, and that Spungen had fallen onto the knife. Vicious admitted killing Spungen during a dispute. But there's apparently some alternate stories about that she was killed from money, that they had a bunch of money that somebody took and stabbed her. So there's conflicting views about that. But anyway, the Virgin Records paid for his bail, and he was suicidal at that point. I think he tried to kill himself. He slashed his wrist, and I think he wanted to jump out the window, but he was blocked. Said that Nancy Sponge's death was meant to happen, that Nancy always said she died before she was 21. She just wanted to have fun. Where he would like to be, he replied, under the ground. So he was already suicidal. She's dead, I'm 11 years, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so here's another assault, which is not unusual for Sid Vicious. He likes to assault people. Anyone who insults him, he'll smash a beer bottle in his face or whatever, anything he can. February 1979, after completing his detox, he was released from Rikers Island. He arrived in Manhattan. He bought some heroin, and then he died. He overdosed. And that usually happens when a heroin addict or a drug addict, heavy drug addict, detoxes, then they go back and use it again. A lot of times that's when they OD, because their body is much more sensitive at that point, and they do the same amounts that they used to do. That's when they OD. So that's pretty common. As far as I know, I don't have any direct experience, but that's what I've heard. Okay, so blah, 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 she's dead. They made a suicide pact, apparently, and Vicious' death was not accidental. She produced a handwritten note in a pocket of Sid's leather jacket, reading, "We had a death pact, and I have to keep my half of the bargain. Please bury me next to my baby. Bury me in my leather jacket, jeans, and motorcycle boots. Goodbye." "We always knew that we would go to the same place when we died," he wrote. "We so much wanted to die together in each other's arms. I cry every time I think about it, that. I promised my baby I would kill myself if anything ever happened to her, and she promised me the same. This is my final commitment to my love." Aw. They weren't buried together. Spongin was Jewish, and he could not be buried next to her, so he was cremated. Okay, so let's go to the astrology. I just wanted to, like, you get it. I needed to establish that, the details of his life. And that's the only way I can do it. Anyway, he's got his Sun conjunct South Node and Venus and Mercury in Taurus in the 7th house. So 7th house obviously is about relationships. Sun in the 7th house is great for being on stage, great for performance, because it's the bright light of the sun, the ego, the pride, the personality is coming out into others, the masses, relationships. These people find their identity through relationships. In personal relationships, it's difficult. Remember, on the one hand, these people will likely find somebody big and bright, like the sun itself, somebody noteworthy, somebody who also has their ego right out there like they do. On the other hand, the sun in the 7th can blind themselves to the other's needs, because the sun is blinding, right? And it's in the house of others. So these people have all their ego is tied up in relationship, so much so that they don't really see the other person very easily. It's and they can only see their own need to be in a relationship. So it's difficult in relationships, but excellent for being on stage, because they're like, the spotlight is like right on them, right on in that relationship. That's where they shine with others, right? It's conjunct Venus. So actually, and I didn't share this, but at some point it said, like, before the drugs, he was great. He was he was kind, he was funny, he was really nice guy, Sid Vicious. And that's Sun conjunct Venus in Taurus, right? But the South Node definitely kind of puts a twist on all that, because South Node conjunct the Sun can show somebody who's very confident, very familiar with their leadership, their ego, their personality, right? And that's kind of what makes him iconic. At the same time, the South Node's going to drain the energy, the vitality, the life force, and make the person very detached in a certain sense about themselves, about their own life, and about their path. And it makes them veer off into like weird corners of the planet. People with South Node conjunct the Sun can live very alternate style lifestyles. They prefer strange, they don't want to be status quo. They're going to live in ways that are just not very worldly, because the sun kind of represents the world, right? Our sun is our relationship to the world, our sun and sun sign. So these people are not worldly. They just don't care about the world. They don't care about themselves. Not that they don't care about themselves, but they're detached from their own ego, right? Doesn't mean they don't have an ego, but it's a separating factor. However, when they're young, and he was only, like, he died when he was 21, that's extremely young. So he never even got to his North Node. So he was living out the South Node and the 7th house. And so that's why he was obsessed with Nancy Sponge. And had he lived long enough, he would have moved into his North Node and been much more of an independent person. I have South Node in the 7th, North Node in the 1st, in Scorpio, early degree Scorpio ascendant. So it's actually very similar to me. And there's a problem with South Node in the 7th, North Node in the 1st, in that, and by the way, guess who else had this? Amy Winehouse. Yep. You can see the similarities there. Early life for South Node in the 7th is very difficult, because they're just like, the North Node is where we don't have experience. So like the ascendant becomes weak. The ascendant is lacking, it's missing, it's open, it's porous. And so these people are highly influenced by other people. Sorry. They need other people in their life, and they're also like overly influenced by the other people in their life, right? And as well as with North Node in the first house, in the first half of life, they can definitely go down deviant paths because the self is not established. They're just not very you know, strong, integrated, integral, integrity is lacking essentially in the early half of life, right? So there's that. He was, you know, one of the things that Johnny Rotten said about Sid Vicious is that he was not the sharpest tool in the shed, meaning that he was not very bright. But I want to say that Mercury in Taurus can appear slow, but it's not stupid. And I don't think he was stupid. I think he was young, right? And he probably did way too much drugs and drinking, which definitely dulls the mind, right? And had he lived long enough to overcome that, he would have found a very Taurian way of thinking, especially because South Node is conjunct Mercury here as well, and that does give a lot of intellectual faculties. Probably the in conjunct to Saturn here, with Saturn ruling the third house, does not help. But you know, he would have come into his own intellectually had he lived long enough. Venus is in Taurus here, conjunct the Sun by 7 degrees. It's not great. It's too close. You know, Venus conjunct the Sun does create a very nice personality and beauty in general. Beautiful looks, beautiful style, especially in good dignity here, like it is in Taurus. But it does combust the Sun, shows difficulty in relationships, and a person who can be really nice 1 minute, and then that combustion, that burnout element can make them very crabby, very annoyed, very, you know, bitter, like something burnt, right? Burnt quality, because the Sun burns things, right? So you have like the periods where it's like it vacillates between non-burnt and burnt, right? That's the alternating pattern with Venus, with any planet conjunct the Sun, but different planets will react differently. And Venus does not like to be burnt. Like Mercury can tolerate a lot more, probably Mars as well. Venus does not. It's the feminine, you know, beauty, right? So Venus is particularly damaged by the Sun. Okay. Ascendant in Scorpio, that gives him that iconic punk rock look, you know, the Sid Vicious tough guy. And he's got Neptune here in Scorpio. Neptune in Scorpio is quite dark, right? This is the 60s. He was born 57, so that's when it started. That's like the 60s drug culture, right? It took a dark turn a lot of times. You can see it in some of the music, like Black Sabbath, or even like you know, the Jefferson Airplane White Rabbit song. This has a dark, heavy kind of feel, even though it's not like heavy. There's a certain darkness to it, which I think is very much related to Neptune in Scorpio. Neptune also for drugs and alcohol, right? Sometimes you can see, like, well, for artists, obviously, yeah, artists, musicians, actors, actresses, things of that nature. But even on the higher end, mystics, poets, spiritual type people, you know, people who've, you know, if you can evolve beyond the lower qualities, that's what you get, a mystic, spiritual, creative type with this. But obviously he was on the lower end with the drugs and alcohol, and that destroyed him. You know, Scorpio in itself is quite destructive. Moon is in Libra in the 12th house, or the conjunct the 12th house cusp. I know some people would say that's the 11th house. I don't, if you use different house styles, the cusp will vary, they'll move. If it's conjunct the cusp, I like to call it in the next house, but especially if it's in the same whole sign house. But you guys already know that. Moon in Libra is very social. Again, bringing in the relationship element that he's, he really loves. He really needs his relationships. Very social, very fair, balanced minded, actually peace loving. Moon in Libra is very peace loving. But I mean, this is not obviously not where he gets his violence from, but this helps him with the creativity. I mean, even though like you can say he wasn't a good bass player. He may have been a good bass player if he lived long enough, but he was just starting out when he joined the Sex Pistols, so he was not very good. But in any case, does make him add, creativity, and he was musical. He sang songs and all that. And it's also Venus disposited. So Sun and Moon are disposited by Venus, and Venus is in very good dignity in Taurus, besides being, and angular, besides being burnt by the sun, combust. There's nothing really, I mean, there's a very light square with Mars, but that's separating, it's not too bad. But going back to the ascendant, Uranus is square the ascendant. And so that's going to bring out the harsher, more negative aspects of Uranus, which is just like independence, rebellion, being shocking. So he, like, despite having, the missing north node, the area where is not very familiar, not very well developed, and he's got this square to rebellious Uranus. So he's bringing out the hardest, most extreme qualities of Uranus, which is just a shocking rebellion, defiance, just like the spark, just like picking up that beer bottle, the base, whatever, glass, whatever, just smashing it on somebody's head, just that kind of thing. Not saying that anyone with Uranus square, that the ascendant will behave like that. Obviously, it depends on how they express it, their own soul evolution. But he was, that's where he was at. That's his, that's how he expressed his, his Uranus square Scorpio ascendant. Yeah. And these are both fixed signs, Uranus and Leo, Scorpio, that both like ego, pride, narcissism. Scorpio ascendant, I gotta say, you probably find the most outright narcissist with Scorpio ascendant, possibly Leo ascendant as well. But between the two, I'd say, yeah, the most narcissistic behaviors and tendencies come from Scorpio ascendant and Leo ascendant. Leo ascendant will have Scorpio in the 4th house, and that's where they get really, like, you go home with a Leo ascendant, it can get dark pretty quickly. And then Scorpio ascendant, because Leo's in the 10th, and like towards the public, they're so egotistical, right? If you notice that, like, that's where they really shine. And like, so a Scorpio ascendant can be just, they can exhibit the most egotism, right? So we got the Uranus square the ascendant. Pluto here, let me show you something. Pluto is very slow. It's 22 hours to direct station. Yeah, so, or 22 hours away. It went direct 22 hours before, so that's less than a day. So it's very slow, very powerful, very potent. And Pluto is very square Venus, right? And so that explains, for a couple reasons. We can see Nancy's death. Number one, Pluto square Venus. Pluto And the square is going to bring out, obviously, the most destructive qualities of a very potent Venus. And square that's strong, Venus is very strong in Taurus, although burnt by the sun. So the relationship between Sid and Nancy was tight. Like, it was like, I mean, I'm sure that they really loved each other, right? As much as they were capable of. They both seem pretty immature, if you ask me, but nonetheless. But this Venus square Pluto will bring in very destructive elements of Pluto, which includes death. But not only that, eighth lord is in the seventh house. And when eighth and seventh mix, then you can have death of partner. And then I have this, and that did happen to me. My girlfriend, who was not my girlfriend at the time, but still my closest friend, she died. And so, you know, pretty much the same thing. Almost. I mean, completely different, but just that she died. And so anyway. And you can also see that with Jackie Onassis, with JFK. So yeah, and then this Pluto is clearly in the 10th house in Leo. So that's like, you know, his public image is very egotistical and very destructive, powerfully so, and powerful as well. Just like really, you know, like he's an icon. That's what he's famous for. He's not famous for being a musician. He's famous for being an icon, right? And so Pluto definitely, and the Scorpio and all that, I really, you know, angular sun, that plays into it strongly. His ascendant Lord Mars is in Cancer. It's debilitated in Cancer because it's exalted in Capricorn. It's trine, so it's in the 8th quadrant, but it's not really 8th because it's trine the ascendant. That's what you got to remember. If the houses are you know, off kilter, skewed, overlapping, whatnot, you have to look to see if it's trine. If it's trine, then it's not going to be really in the 8th or 6th house. Yeah, they'll bring in elements of that, but it's more, it's not going to be fully. So this is 9th house, 8th, 9th. It's bringing in some 8th, but mostly 9th. And I mean, okay, if you want to make an argument that it's in the 8th, fine, because yeah, this represents him, and 8th house would explain why he died young. But you know, I mean, it's also 9th. I mean, because it is trine, and it's a healthy relationship here between the ascendant and Mars. It's in the 9th house, and 9th house does relate to adventure and travel, as well as philosophy, religion, spirituality, things of that nature, connection to God. It's in poor dignity, and with Jupiter in Virgo, I don't expect him to be religious at all, right? Because Jupiter's in Virgo, Mars is not in good dignity here. So this is not a religious signification, but it does indicate a love of adventure, philosophy, and bringing in some 8th house elements of, you know, death, rebirth, crisis, you know, sexuality, intimacy, and all the other 8th house things, shared resources, stuff like that. But Mars being in Cancer, obviously, you know, with Mars in Cancer is not always aggressive, right? But if it's aggressive, then it's bringing in the emotions, so it's not controlled, right? So his aggression was really lacking in integrity, right? It's not like he was planning it out and like justly, like, you know, somebody's abusing somebody's a bully, picking on somebody, and he goes and punches them in the face. Not like that. Not like a really stand-up hero kind of aggressive guy, but like somebody insults his ego and he smashes a beer bottle in their face or hits them with his bass guitar. That's not very dignified, right? And so that's why his Mars is lacking dignity here. It's also semi-square the sun, so that's bringing in further aggressive qualities to his personality. Yeah. So that's an undignified Mars. It's being too emotional. It's not like, yeah, some people with Mars and Cancer might be wimpy. They might just back out of a fight depending on other things that they're in their chart. Not him. You know, he's taking this undignified Mars and bringing out the worst qualities. And we see that often with undignified planets. They're either going to be very passive or really over the top, obnoxious, you know, lacking dignity, just, you know, too forceful and lacking control, self-control and all that. So that's this Mars in Cancer. The nodes are square Chiron in the fourth in Aquarius. Aquarius is the sign of trauma. Yeah, it is the sign of trauma, basically. And so is Uranus. So Uranus square the ascendant. So he was traumatized, I think, from his early childhood, lacking a father, mother, drug addict, kicking him out. There was definite trauma. Chiron, obviously, when it's in poor aspect, indicates pain and wounds and rejection. He was rejected by his mother, right? And he had a very difficult childhood. And that was a huge, you know, it would have been a huge stumbling block for him had he lived longer. Well, it probably already was, but because anything that's square the nodes shows a point that you're going to have, a person is going to have to take up one way or the other, either consciously or subconsciously, depending on its location, you know, what planet it is, what sign, other aspects. But this indicates that his traumatic upbringing was a real, that's something that he would have to continue to work on and face, because it was a real you know, hurtful point experience in his life that he was not going to get away with avoiding. He would not be able to avoid had he lived longer. And he was probably driving a lot of his drugs and violence and all that. A very painful upbringing. Right. Third lord in the second house indicates somebody who's skilled with their voice. Saturn, generally not a great planet for singing, but nonetheless, he was a singer. He was more of a singer than a bass player. I mean, at least as a frontman, like he sang some songs, and they you know, they had their influence, they had their impact. Like I said, I recall My Way. My Way is a good one to check out his vocalizations. Saturn is square Mercury, and that is difficult for expression. Probably inhibits his intellect. Third lord, and it doesn't look like this is a great combination for a musician, actually, because skills represented by the third house, and then Mercury also representing. However, you know, the inconjunct, but however, it is conjunct south node. Mercury is conjunct south node, so that can indicate skills. So probably somewhat of a mixed bag, but this inconjunct would have taken time to overcome and to work through. Yeah. Jupiter is not in good dignity here in Virgo, but it is in the 11th house. So 11th house does deal with groups, networks, and popularity. So Jupiter in the 11th can make somebody very popular and successful, because Jupiter often brings success. Obviously in Virgo, it's not going to be nearly as successful as it would be in, like, you know, in a dignified sign. It's lacking dignity here because it's in detriment, rules Pisces, Jupiter. So it doesn't do well in Virgo. It also signifies that he could have been prone to depression, lack of faith, really no connection or no easy connection to God, or spirituality, things of that nature. But however, Jupiter is trine the sun, so that helps his personality, his ego. It makes him more likable, especially with the 7th, 11th combination here. And yeah, that's generally beneficial. So yeah, like popularity, career success and all that. That's indicated here. What else? Got these squares. I think I got everything. Let's just go to his draconic chart. And again, we have this weak Mars here, but we got a really dignified Mars in the draconic, Mars and Scorpio in the first house. And that really, like, you can, when you put that there and you look at the images of him, you can feel that, right? He's got the look, he's got the image, he's got the attitude. Such an icon, you know. He's always going to be remembered for being that punk rocker, you know, one of like the ideal image of a punk rocker, one of them anyway. Uranus is conjunct Saturn, draconic Uranus, and in the second house, so like voice and speech, shocking, yes, right? Shocking speech, verbal abuse, verbal, you know, just like really like hitting hard with the voice, with his vocals, with what he says, absolutely. Again, more Aquarius. Jupiter and Moon will be good here, but Aquarius in general still for the trauma. Moon, and so this shows his mother, right? Moon over Chiron, that's square, that, and this is square too, the nodes. So really indicates like troubles, trauma, mother, home, early childhood, and that's very true. All right, here we get some Pisces, activating the creativity. Saturn in Aries in the sixth, fighting, tyranny. Saturn in Aries is not very good. Dignity, it's debilitating because it's exalted in Libra. Saturn in Aries is too tough, too tyrannical, not very fair, very selfish. And sixth house for fighting. So yeah. Chiron in the eighth, squarely in the eighth because eighth whole sign. Again, that's you know, death, crisis, things of that nature. Still square the nodes. And then Libra. Actually, we get a exalted and domicile Mercury in Virgo right over the Jupiter, and that probably helps bonify this Jupiter. Probably helps strengthen the left 11th house, because it's 11th house cusp. So popularity, success, career success, also for money, for wealth. He didn't have tons of money while he was alive, but apparently his estate, you know, all the revenue from the royalties and whatnot gets around 400,000 a year. So that's not bad, right? Wouldn't mind having $400,000 a year for, you know, for myself. That would be awesome, but I don't. So, oh well, boo-hoo. And then here we have a bunch of Libra planets. Venus again in dignity, good dignity. Venus rules Libra. Venus over the moon, showing a very prominent relationship with relationships. You know, he needs relationships. He needs women. He loves women. He wants women. That's Venus and Moon together, especially in, you know, Libra, right? It's like, you know, and then Sun in Libra, not very dignified, but Venus is, right? So he's all about love, right? As tough as he was all about romance. He was all about love. I mean, you know, we can wish that he would have, you know, been, you know, more careful with his drug addiction and alcoholism, but was the way it was. And you know, that's unfortunate, but hey, live and learn, I guess, or, you know, we can learn from his mistakes, something like that. Sid Vicious, punk icon, short-lived, very short-lived, but he was the real deal. Rebel without a cause. What else can I say? Not much. That's it for that. That's Johnny Rotten, and Nancy Spungen. I didn't really do her astrology, but she's part of it. Anyway, in any case, I hope you liked it. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment if you like. Book a reading with me. My website is Macro Gold Machine. No, my email is macrogoldmachine@yahoo.com. My website is macroastrology.com. And all right, guys, I will see you again soon. Thanks. Bye.